Okay, good afternoon. This is just a presentation to talk about fixing the basics. A lot of what you'd have heard today is some highfalutin stuff in terms of supply chain, but not all supply chains are advanced as what we've seen today. And certainly what I'll do is give examples of where we can go with three businesses I've been working in Malaysia, in terms of Nestlé Malaysia, in Premier Foods recently, and currently where I am in terms of William Grant's, and really how we can actually drive performance improvement by looking at the basics. We don't necessarily need to go to demand sensing yet. We've got lots of work we can do on ERP systems and everything else. So I work for William Grant, so we've got some sexy products in terms of moving forward. I did work for Nestlé, so very food orientated, so I've gone into drinks, and it's actually a business which is growing 10% year on year in terms of value. So very simply, this is William Grant's. We're an old company, family owned, but now turning over £1 billion. And effectively, the family invests all the time within the products. It doesn't necessarily invest in the systems. So certainly when I'm talking about supply chain, I don't necessarily have all the tools you have. And I actually missed SAP. So I've had SAP for 17, 18 years in a number of markets across the world. I am now SAP-less, and I can tell you, I feel it. So really, why are we here? Well, we're really here in terms of supply chain function to please our customers and consumers. And that really is key. No, we're here for no other reason. We are the enabler for the whole business to be successful. So what we don't want is basically empty stores of our products because we don't get the sales. What we don't want in terms of the spirit industry is our product not being behind the shelf so you can get a nice cocktail or anything else. So also, when we start talking channels, there are a number of different channels, certainly with us, in terms of on and off trade and servicing. And the other thing is what we need to do is to really differentiate ourselves in terms of our value proposition. So there are a number of definitions, which I'm not going to go through in supply chain, but I actually quite enjoy the remit that supply chain gives me to make a difference in an organization. If you read any of those definitions of the three, effectively it tells us we can get involved in nearly every single bit of the business. So we have permission to actually make a difference. And that is really what we need to make supply chain to do. So, you know, I'm actually excited by being a supply chain professional. I've been doing it now for 20 or so years. I don't have many grey hairs, so obviously can't be too bad in terms of a job. But I hope you're enjoying being a supply chain professional too, because now is our time. If I have a look at when I started at Kraft, it was in a planning function in a factory, buying in some corrugate, planning production lines. Supply chain wasn't even a word in 1991. But obviously, as we go through, supply chain is now coming to the fore. And even in the organization I'm in now, supply chain is only really 3 years old. So in lots of different companies, supply chain can be anywhere between an adult and a teenager. And our job is really to drive us up to adulthood. So really, based on what you've seen before, you should realize that supply chain really does add value. So, you know, what do we mean by the basics? I'm not going to define this, but very simply, in terms of what I'm going to be talking about, these are the areas that we've been covering. So obviously, demand planning is obviously the focal point. It is the input into the system. Supply planning, so can I actually produce it? Now, at the moment, for instance, my team do not have a planning system which actually allows them to plan more than 3 weeks out in terms of planning production. So what are we doing? How are we doing capacity planning? Obviously, we have customer service, warehousing, and distribution. So very simplistically, that's what we look after. And if you're sort of at a director level, you sort of have all of those functions. If you're a bit lower, then clearly you actually own a function. And the danger is there can be quite an amount of silos in terms of how people talk to each other. And those level of silos and what you heard earlier means that no one actually owns the KPIs. So certainly, again, from my experience in the last 5 or so years, when I go into an organization and I have a look at the customer service level, and it's quite honestly pretty poor, and you go, well, who owns service? And everyone does this as the coat of arms going, well, it's not me. Everyone owns service. Now, unfortunately, everyone can't own service. There has to be a degree of ownership. So you have to know where you are. So this, for me, this is William Grant last year. So this, I started in October last year, so this is what I inherited. So if you have a look at really where we are, dispatch availability is basically our version of service. So was the product ready outside the bottling halls in time to meet the order? OTIF, on time and full, did it get to the customer in time? So for instance, we shipped to 180 countries, 600 customers. So for me, an OTIF is, did it get into the warehouse in Fremantle? Did it get into the warehouse in Seoul? Did it get to Panama? So my OTIF measure, I look at 99.999 of Muller here, and I would love to be, but I don't think he needs to have some of the supply chains, which are 16 weeks long, from leaving a factory to getting into a warehouse. So we're starting to measure that. You can see we hit green a few times. Now, forecast accuracy, we actually averaged 37.7% last year. I have, globally, a lot of markets negative forecast accuracy. So this is really where we were. Now, when I came into the organization, I said, well, this is the KPIs, and they go, oh, it's tough, isn't it, in supply chain? And so my job clearly was to try and make it less tough in terms of moving forward. So the first thing to say to the team is really, what is our key KPI? And let's at least focus on that, because you need to provide to the organization a foundation stone and a degree of reliability. And, you know, you have to stay strong. Supply chain is not a nice place to be when you're on the back foot. You're just on the ropes getting hit and hit. So the key is, how do we actually move and get onto the front foot? So, you know, for me, both in Malaysia, at Premier Foods, and in William Grant's, you know, the realization is not that great. But for me, that's exciting, because that gives you an opportunity to really make a difference. And the real question is, why? And a lot of this comes back to why. And a lot of the presentations we've been talking about data analytics and everything else, is getting us to ask, why is that the case? So very simplistically, in the last 3 assignments, they boil down to embedding new structures. So people put new structures in place to address an issue without necessarily knowing what the issue is. So you suddenly go in and people are moving seats and they don't know why they're moving. So embedding new structures was one. Coping with a high turnover of staff. So if you work in Malaysia, you can move in supply chain to another company within an FMCG for a 20% pay rise. So certainly when I started in planning, I lost 20% of my planning team of 110 people in the space of 4 months. They got paid their bonus, they handed in their notice, and they moved for a 20% pay rise. So that causes huge issues. The other aspect is poor data transparency and trust in the numbers. So when you go into an MD, and the MD says, I don't really believe your numbers, Patrick, then you know automatically you're on your back foot. And what you find is sales can really use supply chain as the punching bag. So they'd say, I could have hit that sale, we've lost this revenue, if only supply chain had provided it. Once you start proving you have a reliable supply chain, the sales director then picks on someone else, and you then move on to the front foot. And I took great pleasure when Victor said to me after EA, he said, I can't blame you anymore. So that automatically, we knew we were being blamed for things which weren't under our control, but because you weren't on top of the number, it was very easy to kick a dog. The other aspect is here, capabilities of supply chain teams to meet business requirements. Currently, I've moved to Scotland. I love Scotland. I moved there 9 months ago. I am trying to recruit good people into Scotland. So for head of a global logistics role, currently I've got someone flying over from Seville in Spain, because I have not got one good CV from the UK of someone who actually wants to work and live anywhere in central Scotland. So actually recruiting and getting in good, capable people is something which is very, very difficult. So here, I was recruiting yesterday for a role in Hook. Fantastic CVs, southeast of England, brilliant. But once you necessarily get out of that, it is a struggle to get some good people. The only reason I took this job, the taxi driver told me it was 45 minutes from Edinburgh. I love Edinburgh, so I bought in Edinburgh, and he was wrong, it's an hour. But that is my daily commute. So the other thing is, and we're picking up this, there's more than one demand number. Finance has their number, commercial have their number, and supply chain have their number. And this applies even in SAP businesses. People believe there's one number, but the numbers are different, and what's been reflected through, let's say, to Switzerland, or what's been talked, is 3 different numbers. So the first thing is really, how do we get to one number? The quality of the forward number in the demand plan. If a promotion was going well, they wouldn't necessarily put it in the demand plan for the future because, okay, I might be held to account for that increased revenue. Oh, NPD's doing well, but I'm not sure it might not do that, so I don't want to put that into the number. And therefore, you can't invest, you can't really do anything. So the quality of the forward number in the demand plan. And the other thing that was spoken a lot about today is the silo mentality, no? Supply chain does enable the business to break down the silos. We are the people responsible really for facilitating S&OP. So we've been given permission to have the numbers, to have the detail, to be in front of the CEO or whatever, and show the business which is what's going on. So we can break down the silos. The other aspect is, you know, certainly Nestle spends billions in terms of SAP. Other businesses put in ERP systems, but they then don't nurture them. They're not developed. They basically just replace what they have. So the other thing to do is really, how do we harness the ERP systems? And the other thing is, certainly when I got to Scotland and I was saying, who owns? And they go, well, you know, we've got this global target. And I'm going, well, do you know what your service was to Australia? No. Do you know what your service was to there? No. Do you know? And so they got fed up of me actually asking that question. But no one really owned the KPIs because they felt it was a global KPI. So the other thing as we go in is, how do we break down the KPIs at a lower level? And you pass down ownership and bonus accordingly. So the general approach, certainly from my side, when I talk about fixing the basics, is really to break up into the 3 buckets, with the sweet spot being the alignment, obviously, between people, systems, and process. And you know, none of this is rocket science. If it was rocket science, I'm not clever enough to be a scientist. But we have to create engagement. We have to get our people to understand how do they add value. And in terms of the discussion we just had earlier on in terms of the workshop, we need to make sure our supply chain people think they're credible individuals and they're equal to a business manager, they're equal to a brand marketeer, etc. If our people don't believe they're their equal, then the whole function will not see itself as equal. In terms of a system, obviously ERP, master data. When we went into Singapore, they had SAP that had it since 2001. All of their planning of 9 factories, 150 production lines was done in Excel, and then it was put into SAP. So everyone thought they were using SAP, but actually all the planning was. And when we dug into it, actually the master data was all wrong. They'd configured lines because that's how finance wanted them to configure the lines, because it made it easier to control costs. So obviously we had to break it up, understand how all of the processes and units actually worked within the factory, and set up the master data accordingly. And from a process standpoint, you know, continuous improvement. Now, everyone talks about continuous improvement, and again, what people have said today, if you're not showing the data, if what's getting measured is not getting treasured, nothing changes. So we also need to give our people really the functional skills to be able to make a difference. And a big way of doing that is to actually break down information into its component parts so they feel they can make a difference. And obviously, for me at the moment, it's the support to one number. So for instance, finance have Hyperion and commercial have Hyperion, which is Oracle. I have an ERP system called IFS. There's a demand number within IFS globally. And then Hyperion number is what gets shown to the CEO, which is just updated 3 times a year. Once at budget, once at LE1, and once at LE2. So what are we doing now, and I'm going out to all of the markets, is to make sure our distributors are going to actually send through the sales files, and we'll drop it into Hyperion and then copy across into IFS so commercial own the number. Because all of the time, where I have a different number, I have no ownership from commercial. So they can slip and slide in front of the CEO. My job is to stop them doing that. So really, what can be achieved? Well, you can remember the chart from last time in terms of where we are. Well, in the space of 6 months, we've actually got delivery reliability out of the factory up to 99.9 last month. And the big focus in that was to actually understand supplier performance, who wasn't doing what. And again, if we have a look at some presentations earlier, it was proactively managing the overdues or potential overdues. So now in the meeting on a Tuesday, people are saying, we have a potential risk in the next 3 weeks of X. In that meeting are people from procurement, people from manufacturing, people from quality, and they're now fighting to stop that issue occurring. Whereas in the past, just a few months ago, it'll be, oh, well, we had that issue, we couldn't do anything about it. So that really has made the difference there. In terms of OTIF, we weren't even having any reviews with any of our freight forwarders. So we've put in quarterly reviews with our freight forwarders and monthly. I had Kuehne and Nagel came in to see me, and they were doing their quarterly review, and I said, do you know what your performance is on the lanes? And they said, no. I said, well, how can you come to a meeting to me to talk about a service I'm paying you $5 million for, and you don't actually know what your performance is on individual lanes? 3 weeks later, we now have a full-time resource supporting us in Kuehne and Nagel. But again, because we weren't measuring it, because we weren't having the conversation, so we've done nothing here. And in fact, in terms of our OTIF, we've actually reduced our cost of logistics by about 5 to 8% already in terms of the last 6 months. And we've driven up the performance. And forecast accuracy, you know, I would love to have what you lot have in terms of forecast accuracy, but genuinely, at month 1, I was at 37, and we hit 71 last month. So that's fantastic. And against that is with the teams really understanding what they're doing and actually talking to commercial. And I actually present in front of the exec every month in terms of the performance, a customer scorecard. Now, the exec then see that, and then they go out and talk to their directors, who then talk to their business managers. So just by creating that dialogue, already we've broken down some barriers. And in terms of bias, well, actually, the bias number, quite honestly, wasn't that bad. And what was nice to receive from one of our major distributors, we sell them about 1.8 million cases a year, is we got this unsolicited, and they had OTIF out of 99.88, so they had a record. So this was something they sent through to our customer relations team just to say, look, thank you very, very much. But we hadn't really done anything different. We just owned the number. We actually felt we could make a difference. So really, for me, you know, this is achievable, and again, against some of the KPIs you've seen, you may look at those and say, well, why are you so happy? Well, for me, I'm quite happy because the journey from this to this, in essence, with the same team of people, the same ERP system, the same providers, is fantastic. So how was it done? So certainly in Malaysia, we had a Rolls-Royce in the garage, SAP. So we actually got people across from Australia, we got people across from Switzerland, and we actually had a 2-year project running on actually reintroducing SAP within Malaysia, Singapore, from a supply chain perspective. The other thing is focusing on harnessing the ERP system, cleaning up the master data. So again, in terms of where we are at William Grant's, the master data hasn't been cleaned up since it went live 3 years ago. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of lines just clogging up the system. People don't know which SKU to choose when they're putting in a demand plan. So that clearly is a focus area. The other thing is recruit good people. So I've been recruiting for a while now, and you know what? We're just going to cope with the gaps until we get the right people. Because if we do end up putting people to fill positions, actually we're going to create ourselves long-term pain just for what we think might be a short-term gain. The other thing is building credibility. Declare and behave as equal partners. And this, for me, is absolutely critical. I do not want to be apologetic when I go into a senior director meeting and go, oh, I'm from supply chain, I'm sorry, I don't give you the performance. You know what? What I do is equally as important as what the sales director does, okay? What the marketing director does. And I need my team to feel the same thing. I do not want my team being kowtowed by business managers phoning up from Poland saying, you need to provide this, you're useless, do it. I want them to say, look, you didn't give me the forecast, you haven't done this, you need to get your ducks in a row before coming after us. But this credibility is absolutely key to driving supply chain performance. The other thing is, why do we go to work? Now, we're so used to talking about customer service as the real reason for coming to work, but quite honestly, some people do forget about it. They get lost in a host of KPIs. So reality for me is really that is why we come to work. Now, clearly, we do want to get better at costs and everything else, but really, this absolutely is key. And the other thing is, we have to empower our people. And from that, it's about creating goal alignment. So if I have a look at the business objectives, what does my powerhouse look like? What are we focused on? What are my teams focused on? And just drag that down. So everything comes from the top to the bottom. But when you do that, actually, you've then got ownership at a level that matters. Because me feeling responsibility for the top-line OTIF isn't necessarily going to help my customer relations and logistics people who own a particular lane, who own a particular market. They have to have the same information that I do at their level. So, very quickly, in terms of, so what's next? Foundations are getting in place so we can move forward. So as I said, at the moment, I don't even have master production scheduling at the moment in William Grant's. I have no constrained production plan for the next 18 months. I have no idea what my utilization is going to be before Christmas. So I really need to look at how do we put MPS and proper MRP in place, for an example. The strategy stays the same, but you can ask for more. Because now there is less firefighting, because the noise has gone away, the team now have more energy, and we can actually ask them for more. Whereas before, it's, sorry, Patrick, we don't have the time. But when you start seeing the KPIs going in the right direction, you know the noise level is dropping. And you know what? Eventually, we get that, and now I can really start asking the team for a reduced cost to serve because we've created the foundation in place. We've created the reliability to the business. So now the business is not necessarily attacking supply chain. It's starting to realize that we are an enabler. And the key, I can't say it strong enough, it's how we become an enabler, and it's how we take all of the opportunities that are provided to us that at senior and executive level, we show how we make a difference. So for instance, this week I was running the global S&OP meeting with the CEO. We were looking at the numbers, and I said, look, your forecast looks wonderful, doesn't it? Because it just looked miraculously that we're going to hit budget for the year. But then we provided some pictures on 5 key brands, 3 of which are consistently under forecasting. So there's a huge opportunity worth millions there, which should really go into the P&L. But more worryingly, on one of our key brands, actually is in decline because the market's in decline. So we're actually saying there's a risk to the business of about 300,000-400,000 cases worth. And if you're in the BBU, so in the commercial side, you don't care because you're going, well, I'm going to hit my profit target. But in my side of the business, if we lose 400,000 worth of cases, that's 400,000 less of overhead recovery, which we will then have a big P&L impact, obviously, when it gets to the end of the year. So it really is just taking those opportunities to make a difference and getting your teams and giving your teams the opportunity to make a difference. So that was really a whistle-stop tour in terms of just by almost being relentless on providing visibility in the KPIs, empowering your people, really, you can make a difference without spending any money.